Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. I'm your host, Adam Horner. With 30 years in the industry, including over a decade as a CTO, I have coached and mentored more than 100 engineers and tech leaders. This podcast covers crucial topics for CTOs, providing insights, strategies, and practical advice to help you build and refine your own playbook to excel in your role. In this episode, I'll be speaking to Carol Palombini about psychological safety. Carol is a seasoned psychologist and leadership coach, and we're going to learn why we struggle with innovation in engineering teams. Carol is going to talk us through her 6-step playbook to establish the habits of a psychologically safe environment that enables innovation to take place. Keep listening to hear the one quick task you can do right now to immediately get an idea of how much work you have ahead of you to get your team to innovation. Welcome, Carol. Thanks very much for joining me on the podcast. Of course, I joined you on your podcast a few weeks ago. It's now really great to be able to turn the favor. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you for having me, Adam. It's been nice. It was an amazing conversation, and I was looking forward to talking to you again as well.
Fantastic. So for those of us who didn't see that episode where we both introduced ourselves, it'd be really great if you just give us a bit of an introduction to yourself, how you got to where you are, and so that we understand how you know so much about psychological safety.
Well, my name is Carol Palombini. I am a psychologist, and I've been working in human resources and people management since 2008. So I have a lot of experience in the business side of things, in the strategy of people management, and psychological safety is definitely one of the most important things that you have to establish to make sure that your team is effective. And it's not just about mental health, it's also about productivity as well. And during my career as a psychologist and in human resources, I realized that most of the time, although the company had a lot of policies, values in place, mission statements, some groups were feeling safer and were really productive and innovative, and other groups were not. So we could see that psychological safety really depends on leadership and on leadership behavior. So when I decided to build my consultancy and my own practice, I decided that I would focus on leadership behavior because that's where the biggest difference comes from. So today I work with psychological safety, mainly bringing awareness of leaders and actually teaching them how they can create psychologically safe habits in leadership.
Right. And so starting with the top of the company so you can have the biggest influence because it's literally the most influential part of a business is the leadership team. Is that the approach basically?
Yes, it is. So when you have the C-level that doesn't understand the value of psychological safety, that kind of feeling will cascade down, will ripple negatively throughout the entire corporation. So it's like this. You have the CEO who probably will put some pressure on you and bomb any idea that you have as incomplete or something like that. Then you feel the same way that you cannot ever have incomplete idea and suggestions, and you will do the same with your staff. So it's a chain of behavior. So actually, when we're talking about culture, which psychological safety is the base of a healthy culture, we're talking about behavior, right? We're talking about how to ripple this behavior so they can reach from the C-level to anyone in the organization.
Right. And so you work with, you mentioned the C-level quite a bit there. Do you mainly work with the very top C-level, or is there sort of an aspect of leadership that you work with more than the others? Because obviously I generally represent the CTOs and the tech side of it. Is that something you work with more than the other parts of leadership?
No, I think that when it's one-on-one, it's mainly the C-levels that look for my help when I'm coaching or mentoring them. But when I'm working with groups, it's usually middle management and the C-level that's responsible for that team. So the CTO takes part in the workshop or the leadership talks that I do. But I'm working directly with any kind of leader. So it depends. Sometimes they even want to get rid of all the hierarchy and they just want to work the engineering team as a whole, like all the leaders there to align everyone with the same kind of mindset.
Right. Okay. Got it. Cool. So since we're talking so much about psychological safety, it's probably worth actually stepping back to the basics and actually defining What is psychological safety?
That's a very good issue, because what I think is most people don't actually understand what psychological safety is. And Google actually did understand the importance of psychological safety. They had this paper called Rework, and if you want, it's online, it's available. And they found out the 5 pillars of team effectiveness at Google's, and they researched only their most effective and their best teams. And the number one pillar was by far the most important one was psychological safety. So how can we actually understand what that is without having to recur to a lot of concepts and complex constructs? So it's about feeling safe to take risks around your teammates. You want to make sure no one will feel embarrassed or will be punished by admitting a mistake, asking a question, or offering an idea. And another important aspect of psychological safety is understanding there are 4 levels of psychological safety. And usually this is the point where leaders miss the most. When we're talking about psychological safety, it's common that people think about inclusion. And inclusion is the cornerstone for any kind of psychological safety, but it's just the first step. After that, you also have to make sure you have the learner safety, the contributor safety, and the challenger safety. And in the end, is the condition in which you feel included, safe to learn, safe to contribute, and safe to challenge the status quo. Of course, there are some companies and some stages of the business where you're not that interested in the challenger safety. You have to make sure inclusion safety and learner safety is in place. This is a precondition for any kind of healthy environment. But then you have to decide if you want to go ahead and innovate and go to contributor safety and challenger safety. Because maybe, I don't know, you are a bank institution, work for a bank, and all the processes there must be really secure. You have to follow those procedures. So you cannot have someone challenging the status quo often. Or maybe you can just have one team. So understanding psychological safety is understanding what you want to get out of that as well. Not only a healthy environment, but do you innovate or not?
Right. Okay. So if I try and just summarize that as somebody who has some idea, but not a massive idea about it. So the fundamental thing that you said there is it's the feeling of being safe to basically challenge things. It starts with, there's 4 levels. It's not binary. It's 4 levels, right? This is something that there's sort of a concept that I think is important to get our heads around. So it's the first level, and it's like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's cumulative, right?
It is.
Okay. So the first level is to feel included. The second level is that it's safe to learn. The third level is that it's safe to contribute. And then the ultimate level is that it's safe to challenge. And what you're saying is that because it's not binary, because it's not safe or not, it's about how much of a safe environment you want to have for the actual culture and result that you want to have then.
Exactly. It's exactly that. So the 2 first levels are mandatory. If you're not doing that, you should be doing that, and you must be concerned with that before you got concerned if they're contributing enough, and before you decide if you want to innovate.
Yeah, because when I talk to engineers pretty much everywhere, it's almost always the number one thing about engineers is they want to learn. They're always hungry for knowledge and looking for learning. So having an environment where it's safe to learn is pretty much ground zero. It's a non-negotiable start to having a learning organization. Excellent. So why don't we talk then a little bit about some of your experiences of where you have found amazing places with great psychological safety, and perhaps even the inverse of that, where you came across some places where it was evident from very early on that there wasn't a good psychological safety environment.
Well, let's start with the bad example, and then we close with the good one. So the bad example is usually very common in tech teams. So I'm going to tell just a recent example. There was this team, they were super excited. They never got into any conflict. They were all like they built a friendship around the team. So it was really fantastic. And they loved their boss. So why is this a bad example of psychological safety? Because there were no debates. There were no contributions. And although they loved their boss and they assessed them as an amazing person, it was that trait of being so amazing, so respected, that was hindering the psychological safety of the team. How did that happen? So first, you have to understand that usually engineering people, they are risk avoidant and they don't like to be corrected. They hate to make mistakes. So they're very often safe and they want to be sure about what they're saying, if it's going to be accepted or not. So the first thing was the group setting. They were really friends, so they didn't want the other person to look bad if they contradicted one of their ideas. So this group thinking was taking care of everyone's mindsets. It was overcoming their need to learn and to innovate. And on the other hand, you had this amazing leader who was really personally connected to the team, and he could not foster the innovation and the ideas, although he asked for them frequently. And he verbally said, you are allowed to make mistakes, but it didn't echo with the team. But the problem is he was too extroverted. The team was mainly introverted. So he was always like brainstorming his ideas. And the team was really concerned of going against his idea. He was the first to speak.
He's sort of dominating almost by accident then in terms of the way that he was taking the team.
Exactly. And that's where we see that intention is not everything. You can have the best intention and still hinder people's contribution and hinder innovation if you're putting the self as the highest person, as the roof to be achieved.
That's a fantastic example because I think it's really counterintuitive the way you explained it. And I wouldn't have expected that from the sort of scenario setting that you put out there. So I'm really glad you went through that. So if that's what it doesn't look like, then what does a really good environment from a psychological safety perspective look like?
This is also counterintuitive, but conflicts. If you have good conflicts, you have debates that do not turn to hot debates. And what do I mean by hot debates? People are not accusing themselves. They are not personalizing their ideas. So if you are giving an idea and someone can, in a healthy way, contradict your idea and it's not attacking you as an entire person, then you have a healthy debate. So psychologically safe environments, they have conflicts. It's in the base of the innovation, of the contribution, of the learning process. If you have this amazing team that never complains and they never get into conflict and they agree in everything, no one is learning. They're just repeating what they've learned before. Another good way of understanding when you have good psychological safety is when people do not avoid difficult conversations. So you can see someone like, for instance, is lagging on work and it's compromising the rest of the team, maybe because he cannot ask for help. The person in the team that spot that should feel safe enough to address that issue. Oh, I can see you're lagging. Do you need some help? Is there anything that I can do for you? So let's talk about this.
And that often ends up being the leader, I think, whether they are in the position of leadership, or whether it's an informal leadership role that they take. It's that person who steps forward and takes that action, often is the sort of the person who is respected most. But it's very interesting what you say about conflict there, because I'm thinking back to a lot of the roles that I've had where there have been conflicts, and there's a fine line, I think, between where you've got conflict, where you're attacking the idea, where you're debating the processes, the ways of working. But there's this, where it gets emotional at times. And occasionally it seems like a fine line where it can tip over into suddenly becoming personal, even if it's not part of the culture or intention.
Yes, it's hard to manage conflicts in a healthy way, and that's one of the gaps usually CTOs have. They don't like conflicts, and they don't like emotions and handling emotions. And conflict is all about emotions and being contradicted and learning how to handle this. But this is a skill that you can learn. You don't have to be a totally different person to learn this. You don't have to become an extroverted or even a psychologist to handle that. But some rules, when you put some rules in place before you have this kind of discussion, it's easier to ask for people to dim down the temperature of the discussion. You can even have some kind of like safe words or like, let's take a break. So people should take a break. So, okay, I'm seeing that this is not being productive. Let's take a break. Let's take 10. Let's review the meeting goals and the policies for constructive debate, and we'll be back in 5 minutes.
Brilliant. Okay, cool. So before we get into the techniques and the whys and the hows, it's probably good to just take a bit of a tangent first and have a look at sort of why we need to do this. So, what are the risks and challenges? What are sort of the inevitable events that happen when you don't take care of the psychological safety of your team, your environment, your organization? What does it look like when it's absent?
Well, let's put it in the very dramatic scenario where the psychological safety is low in all of the stages and it's a complete chaos in this way. So first of all, you lose your best talents. Engineers, they don't like conflict and they don't even want to say they are dissatisfied. So they will just leave you. You won't even have the chance to retain them. They will just leave you because they are not being respected, so included, or they don't have the opportunity to learn. That's what you mentioned earlier. One of the biggest benefits that engineers look for and even tech leaders look for is learning and growing. And if they don't feel that they have space for that, they would just leave and you won't even know why.
Right. So if you've got a retention problem, it's a big red flag then for the psychological safety of the team.
Yes. If you have a huge churn, of course, churns has other things that you have to consider, like salary and other more basic things. But this is something that you should be assessing for sure to understand what was the weight of this of psychological safety in the decision to leave the company. The other most very important thing is like actually performance. When you don't have the psychological safety in place, people won't feel safe to give ideas or to improve their communication. They will work more in silos, and we all know how that goes and how much rework we have to do because you didn't get that information clear enough with the sales team or with the client. And I think that the most important, especially for CTOs, is innovation. See, the CTO, they are responsible for putting the business strategy into technology, like supporting the business strategy with technology. You have to inspire people to innovate. You have to ripple that throughout the organization, right? So how we are going to do that if people don't feel safe to contribute and to challenge what even you have said and you have established before?
Yeah. So that could maybe that's quite difficult to spot then, those two aspects you mentioned there. I mean, obviously when you've got a churn risk and it's not easily attributable to other things like outside events or the market or salary and so on, I feel like that would be a relatively easy red flag to look at and go, okay, let's have a look and see how the team feel. But if innovation slows down, I can imagine there's a lot of organizations that talk about that and probably attribute a number of reasons to it at times. How would you try and diagnose the challenges that are going on there?
I think that I advocate for starting with your self-assessment. I created an assessment. I can send you the link later so you can put in the comments and people can assess. I created this assessment based on behavior. So our leadership behaviors to foster psychological safety. So the first thing is actually make a thorough assessment of how you think you could be doing more or you're lagging on. But it's not enough. Usually we have a lot of blind spots and we think that we are good and that people should be happy and you see people happy. So what's going on? And you have to, so in order to actually know what's going on, you have to put on assessments, anonymous assessments of psychological safety.
Why anonymous?
Because if it's not anonymous, it's not a safe questionnaire. If you are putting yourself that vulnerable, so people will know that you're the one saying that you don't feel safe enough to give an idea, you will be afraid that this will come back at you later on.
Right. Okay. You don't want to be the one who stands out in an environment where it isn't safe to start with. I see. Yep.
Exactly. So anonymous surveys are the most important way that you can actually understand what's going on. And also in the exit interviews. Usually it's the people department that is responsible for this, but exit interviews are super important. You have even to this is also a measure that will prevent people from accusing you to be the cause. Because maybe you are contributing to that, but maybe you are the one contributing for the person to stay. And even though you are an amazing leader that fosters psychological safety, they left. So it's also important to make sure you're not going to be blamed for something that's not your responsibility.
Okay, good. I mean, I think that's because that did answer the question that I had there, which was how do you tell if it's yourself? And clearly an assessment is the way to go. So let me ask a slightly different question then. So if a CTO finds themselves in a toxic environment and they probably unwittingly are copying the behaviors that they have around them, the behaviors that are done to them, what can a CTO do in that environment where they feel like they're in a toxic environment, but it's not something that is down to their fault? It's down to the environment that's coming from them, perhaps from the rest of the exec team, perhaps from one of the other key leaders. What can a CTO do in that environment?
First of all, understand that you're a victim of the environment as well. So take care of yourself. What would you need to feel safe? Because if you are in a toxic environment, probably you're not feeling safe enough to speak up to the CEO and to the other C-levels. So you have to start with that. What does it take for you? But since you are in a C-level position, you can be proactive in trying to get back that kind of power of that kind of safety. So you can work with that. But is it worth it? Then it's a completely different situation. So I think that once you are in a toxic environment, you are a victim of that. You're probably getting close to burnout as well, because usually CTOs have this tendency, and when they actually feel the toxic environment, it's because they already feel it in their bodies.
Right. Okay. So physical manifestation.
It seems like CTO, they try to solve everything by themselves, and then when they actually look for help, it's because something's really, really wrong. And it's already to the point that they're almost burning out or they have burned out. So first of all, understand that you are a victim of this and you need outside perspective. It's like you are in the middle of a hurricane and you cannot see things clearly. So you need outside perspective. Even it could be a mentor. It could be a friend that works in another organization and understands organization, how they work, to get you a clear perspective of this.
It could be a coach, of course.
It could be a coach, of course. And so you get that external help and you really understand that I'm living in a toxic environment and I think I have an opportunity to turn that table around and change the environment. So how am I going to address this situation with the rest of the C-level? So that's where emotional intelligence in social awareness plays a big role. You have to be very aware of how the organization works. So that means organizational awareness. Understand how decisions are really made, not in the paper, but in reality. Understand these people's profiles. What are the benefits they expect to get? And you have to go to the benefits. So if we want to get this benefit, we have to provide psychological safety. Otherwise, come with data, come with examples, other companies that had done the same benchmarking. So you should have at least 4 arguments that will be good enough for any kind of personality. First of all, the dominant personality. So you can go directly to benefits and numbers and bring back future numbers that will improve once you get the psychological safety. You could be talking to another. If you are a CTO, you're probably a very analytical person with a high level of compliance. You should bring data, important thought leaders that are talking about this that will influence this kind of person. To influence an influencer, the person has a lot of influence in their profile, the communicator, the people like me who have a lot of communication, they are very extroverted. Usually it works very well, giving a very beautiful vision of the future, showing how very influential people are doing that, and we could be on the next hype of the moment. So influence people, they want to be on the trends.
Right. So appealing to the vision that they want to create effectively.
Exactly. And to the last one, which is the stability kinds. The stability kinds, they like stability. So you have to show them the step-by-step of doing that. So they will be safe to make that change.
Right. But then this takes an understanding of who the person is that you need to convince. And then what is the approach to convince them? And if you're not sure, well, I suppose one option is to try a couple of these different approaches if you're going to basically guess at a couple of them. But have you got any examples of where somebody's actually gone through this process and successfully ended up changing the culture in the C-level to create a different environment, allow them to ripple that down through engineering and perhaps other teams as well?
Well, what I've seen the examples are CTOs that were able to, a CTO that was able to actually convince the C-level that they needed an innovation department. So he built a whole innovation department where he could have the psychological safety to innovate there. Changing the entire culture might be too difficult. And it's so challenging that it's easy to give up. Start small. Maybe you can put on a special team to make sure and show how that could work, because psychological safety, remember again, it depends on your leadership. So if you are mature enough and you can block that kind of toxicity and actually be a leader that fosters psychological safety, it will work with your team.
Right. Okay. So you don't necessarily have to have a good environment around you. You can force the environment for those people who are working with you most closely.
Unless there's someone above you who will go over your everything that you do. So then it's impossible. But if you are a CTO, as most CTOs have the autonomy to lead their team as they wish, you can do that if you are aware that you are a victim of this toxicity. So if you're not aware of how that is actually hurting you, you will probably project that on your team.
Right. So back to the self-awareness and the self-assessment first, then in that environment. Yeah. Brilliant. Cool. It looks like we're very much getting towards the point we understand why we need to do it. We're able to convince others around us of the value of creating an environment and how to convince those 4 different personality types you mentioned. So what do we need to do then to begin to build a psychologically safe culture? What are sort of the cornerstone pieces of it?
Okay, so let's step by step. So there's a 6-step way so you can get there. First one, 6 steps to get to the psychological safety. First, make a self-assessment of your leadership behavior to foster psychological safety. Second one, assess your team anonymously. Third, identify root causes of a lack of psychological safety. 4, build solutions with your team. This is super important. Don't try to put the solutions as down the throat of your team. Make them participate to build this with you. Step number 5 is to make assessment a habit. So it's not going to be one time. You have to keep assessing and check if you improved. And the last one is recognize and reward behavior. So that's something that people usually forget. But if you're not rewarding that behavior, you're not going to foster habits. And psychological safety is about behavior. It's about habits. So how can you do that in practice? Suppose you have a meeting and you are assessing a problem with a client, and you don't know if you're going to put the feature that the client asked in this sprint, or if it's going to be in the next one, or if you have to negotiate something else with them. And you want people's people's points of view about that. So when someone asks, so should we accept any demand of the client, which is something that usually, but the client is the king. How are you not going to accept any demand? So shouldn't we take this back to the sales team and let them handle this? And if you are super afraid of messing with the status quo, you probably say, "No, this is not what we're discussing now." You're going to hinder their ability to speak. But on the other hand, you can say, "Wow, that's a good contribution. That's out of the box. So let's take notes of this right now and check what could be the consequences of that." So you're rewarding their behavior to foster the idea, although you're not going to take that idea. You don't have to take the idea to reward people giving ideas.
Right. Okay. So it is about giving the feedback on people's attempts to bring different viewpoints, basically to debate the aspects and points.
Exactly.
Cool. So we just run through it again. So number 1 was assess the behavior. Number 2 was the team assessment. So again, the first 2 stages are all about assessment. Number 3, remind me, what was number 3?
Identify the root causes of a lack of psychological safety. And that's once you have the assessment, you will understand, because there's so many things that could be wrong. And maybe it's just one thing, and you just have to work on that one thing. So you don't have to create several initiatives to tackle everything. But maybe you don't have conflict, and you should foster more healthy conflict. But people already help each other. They ask for help, and that's okay. You don't have to mess with that. Right.
Okay. But so is it often the case that there is basically one single root cause, or is that where you're talking about the sort of keep assessing. That's where you go back through the whole process and go, okay, what is the current best assessment of the root cause here, and tackle that one next?
Yes, exactly. One at a time. Usually when we're talking about behavior, we tackle things one at a time. It's too difficult to change lots of behavior at the same time. So it's just tackle the most important one, see how that works, and keep talking about this. Make this a habit to talk about psychological safety, to talk about productivity, innovation. This should be a conversation.
Excellent. Cool. And that basically gives us then the playbook to keep going and keep improving, because it is basically stepping up that level of needs and then also understanding, you know, where do we stop? Where is appropriate for us as an organization, as an industry, as a group of people? So it probably could well be that we end up with different target levels in different teams or groups around the business.
Yes, exactly. There's no need for everybody to be challenging the status quo, but it's very important for everyone to feel included, feel they are learning, and that they can contribute.
Excellent. That's really good. So I think that gives us a really good idea. If there is one thing that you would say that a CTO, particularly CTOs with the sort of the common, profiles of CTOs, the attributes that they typically have, if there was one thing that they should definitely do, what would that one thing be?
They should listen more to their teams and involve them. They should, I don't think that it's something that they should be doing. It's something that they should not stop doing. It's more about stop trying to be the expert and being admired for being the expert. I think that that's the biggest thing that hinders psychological safety when we're talking about CTOs and their teams, is wanting to be so important, so admired for your knowledge and for everything that you know, that will definitely hinder people's ability to innovate.
That's one of those things that I really felt like was a big shift as I was going up through the stages of being a CTO, was getting to that point where you become effectively the expert. And you could be the expert technically, you could be expert on the customer, you could be expert on the actual solution that you have. But then you almost have to invert that, don't you? And what you just said just reinforces that again, is that you then need to sort of step back and become the leader from the back in order to be able to allow everybody else's thoughts, ideas, plans, and counter plans to be expressed, because that is literally how you create the psychological safety, is that by allowing that conflict of idea, of expression, rather than you being the, what do you want to call it, the alpha technologist, or the alpha speaker, basically.
Yes, you have to find another value in your profession that's not being the thought leader, the expert. And if I could leave the audience with one question for them to increase their self-awareness regarding psychological safety, especially CTOs, is ask yourself, how did you react the last time someone challenged your ideas? Look at the past. Because CTO, they put themselves in hypothetical situations and they think they're going to do great. And we all do great in hypothetical situations. But it's looking at the past and actually understanding what we have how we behaved in the past that's going to give us the real clues to what we have to work on ourselves.
So as a sort of a quick 10-second check, without going through an assessment, without getting our team to do an assessment, if we just think as ourselves, as senior leaders, when was the last time I was challenged and how did I react and how did I behave? Is probably a pretty good idea of what those surveys and assessments are going to tell us anyway.
Yes, especially regarding innovation.
Right. And why is innovation such a special thing? Is it because you need to feel safe in order to be able to take a leap into something that is literally unknown? Is it as simple as that?
It's because you don't feel safe to challenge. Because usually when you challenge, to innovate, you have to challenge. So innovation is going out of the status quo, going out of the procedures that are already established. So you are challenging everyone that's there. You're super vulnerable when you do that.
Right. And you literally can't have innovation without challenging the status quo, without the current thinking.
It's impossible. Otherwise, you're going to have incremental innovation, and that's more of a contribution safety. When you just have incremental things, but you're not actually breaking through or giving ourselves or doing something really amazing and different.
Right. And again, we may have different teams that have a different desired level. So if you've got innovative teams that are breaking new ground, they're the ones who need to have that really safe environment. If you've got other teams perhaps who are either in maintenance or supporting existing stuff that aren't particularly tasked with innovation, then the level that you need to get to in terms of those 4 levels, safe to contribute, but not necessarily needing that safe to challenge environment. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. But that should be super clear. You should be able to say to your team, okay, so we are not on an innovation process now or moment or area department, whatever, but I want you to contribute and how you want them to contribute, what can be done and what can't be done. So it's very important for you to set the boundaries and not waste people's energy on things that are not going to be changed, because you know that this is super important for business strategy. They might not understand at that point.
Excellent. Safe conflict and safe challenges. It's a good hallmark to see if things are going in the right direction. And then that allows us to have the innovation when you can have these safe arguments where people know that they're not going to be attacked personally, they're not going to be shot down, they're not going to be overridden by somebody else, that they're going to be at least heard, even if their idea doesn't end up being the one at the top of the pile at the end of the sprint or wherever it is.
Yes, and they will have feedback on their idea. So this idea, why is not going to be implemented now? It's important to give people's feedback on their ideas, not just by listening, getting in a vacuum.
Cool. So the idea, no matter where it comes from and how it is going to be valuable. It's going to be heard, not necessarily implemented, because it may not be the best idea. It may be challenged, but that's okay too. Brilliant. I love the 6-step framework, Carol. I think that's really powerful. And I think that's a very quick one step of just look backwards at the last time that you were challenged and how you reacted and how you behaved is a really powerful, quick way to think about what is the likely level of psychological safety in my team, my area, my organization. Brilliant stuff. If there's ways that people can get hold of you, what's the best way for people to look you up, Carol?
Well, LinkedIn is my most important platform, but they can also reach me out on my email, carol@carolpalombini.com. And I'm super available. My LinkedIn profile also has like this book a chat with me button that you can go straight to my calendar and book a chat to understand how I can help you improve psychological safety in your team or improve your leadership as an emotional intelligence development.
Fantastic. So we'll make sure we've got the link to that in the show notes so people can find you. Carol, thanks for sharing your insights on psychological safety in the engineering teams. It's a challenge I think that many tech leaders are facing these days, and I'm sure our listeners are going to benefit greatly from your experience. To our listeners, if you found today's episode valuable, please visit the website to join the CTO Playbook community and access more resources for your CTO journey. The link will be in the show notes. Until next time, stay innovative and keep leading with impact.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for listening all the way through to the end. Just before you go, I'd like to ask you for one thing in return for putting together all these episodes of the CTO Playbook podcast for you. Please leave a review. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whichever platform you're on, leaving a quick review will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.